Vítám vás u dalšího dílu podcastu Insider. Moje jméno je Michal Půr a se mnou je tady i můj kolega Tomáš Jirsa.
Dobrý den.
Ještě než začneme, máme tady pár obvyklých vzkazů od Tomáše.
Rádi bychom poděkovali našim skvělým partnerům za jejich trvalou podporu. Advokátní kancelář Rowan Legal, která se dlouhodobě zabývá digitalizací a e-governmentem. Partnerem našeho pitného režimu je společnost Cans.
Chceme zároveň poděkovat všem, kdo nás pravidelně poslouchají a podporují. Pokud chcete slyšet celý díl, přeplaťte si ho třeba na platformě Patreon, konkrétně na adrese patreon.com/ to je takový to lomítko, Insider Podcast. Odkaz najdete v popisku pod videem a teď už jdeme na to.
Tak koho jsme si pozvali, Michale?
My jsme si pozvali Michaela Schellenbergera. Hi, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Thank you. Good to be here.
Já budu mluvit ještě chviličku česky, to je americký autor, novinář, jeden z autorů Twitter Files, člověk, který je v takzvaném sdružení The Free Press, ve kterém, je to přispěvatel, ve kterém jsou řada těch autorů Twitter Files, postaral se o pořádný skandál v Brazílii, o tom budeme mluvit. Je to také člověk, který se zabývá jadernou energií, zabývá se klimatickou změnou a kandidoval na guvernéra Kalifornie v roce 2018 a v roce 2020.
Did you understand it?
Something about, I think I ran for governor of California, somewhere in there.
All right. So we cannot. We have to start with what brought you here to the Czech Republic.
I wanted to come because we have there's a Czech reporter who has been doing some stories for us, Cecilia Jilkova. Did I say her name right? Jilkova.
Yeah, we know.
And she's she's a really important person for us because she's. The first story she did, she started to uncover the censorship that occurred and the disinformation around COVID. And after that, we've been looking at other information operations, as they call them, by governments, including some of this recent stuff around ostensibly Russian funding of right-wing candidates. But I wanted to come because we really support her work and want to see more of it and want to see more of that around the world. And we're gathering a bunch of journalists and researchers in England June 20th to 23rd. But I felt like, the country that really, people don't pay enough attention to Czech Republic, right? I mean, that's probably go to Germany and France. And I felt like we wanted to come here and sort of see what things were like.
When you came to the studio, you've asked us that if we will broadcast this recording.
If there's any chance it gets Cancelled.
Well, because I had this flashback because it's a very similar format to a podcast I did in Brazil, which really annoyed me because we sat down exactly this format. We did an hour and a half. The guy opens the podcast talking about how he's very anti-woke and how courageous he is in standing up to cancel culture. And then they called us right afterwards and were like, we're not going to broadcast it because we don't want to be censored by the government. So I just had a little flashback from that, but you guys reassured me that wouldn't happen. So.
I think there's a lot of debates on whether government is trying to do, and there was at the beginning of Russia-Ukraine war, there was this attempt by government to censor some of the websites. It happened, but other than that, I think the Czech Republic is pretty safe in this regard.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. It's as you get older, you realize all the cliches that you heard your entire life turn out to be true. And the cliche in this department is the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. I don't know if that's a saying you use in Czech Republic, but I didn't believe that because I grew up where both the liberal left and the radical left were united in support of free speech. And so I never thought it was an issue I was going to work on. And I've only been working on it now for a year and a half. And I now get it. I'm like, you really do have to continue to make the case for free speech. It's not intuitive that you would have free speech. You actually have to inculcate it in the population that you should allow people you disagree with and even hate to speak. And that's a much better society than one where committees of experts decide what's true and false before it gets published.
I think the difference between the situation here and in the US is in the US it's a long-term thing. For us, it's 3 or 4 decades since the fall of the Soviet Empire.
Right.
So, but I think it's coming here because it's those generations that really experienced how freedom of speech was non-existent. Now, they're gone, and now the newest generations, I think they don't really appreciate the value of it. So I think it's coming.
I absolutely agree. We talk about there's an organic demand for censorship that's sort of from young people, and then there's an inorganic element, which is coming from the governments. And sometimes it's hard to tell the two apart because it's often the young people in the government that are demanding censorship. But that's right. I mean, I just interviewed a former president of the ACLU, which used to be our most important free speech group, and she just said, yeah, it was the younger staff that came into ACLU that was much more opposed to free speech. And you even see, I have a professor at Yale, constitutional law professor, that told me recently that his students say, oh, free speech is a kind of, white supremacy colonialist idea.
Concept.
It's bonkers. It's scary.
That's not the case in the Czech Republic. We are starting to talk about fighting against disinformation.
Yeah.
That's the first phase, I would say.
Yeah.
Right.
The second will be this one.
Yeah. Well, the two go together in the sense that what they do is they'll first label something disinformation and maybe suggest, well, we just need to counter this disinformation. But then that's then pretext for demanding that it be censored or throttled or shadow banned or something to restrict that content. But it usually starts by labeling something that they don't like disinformation.
And do you think back in the United States, is the pendulum of, I would say, calls for censorship and political correctness, has it already peaked and it's coming back? So meaning, because following from here, I really like, all the podcasts and stand-up comedians. And you see there was a year ago, it was a peak in these, I would say, corporate attacks and silencing them. But it seems they went through it. And now and for me, the showcase was the Budweiser, Bud Light controversy. And now you see them engaging Shane Gillis and basically turning the whole thing, all the way around.
Which is brilliant, by the way. Shane Gillis is brilliant, right?
He's great.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I think it's peaked, but I think it's probably plateaued rather than declining. So there's just these institutions have been taken over by a lot of the woke, and they haven't been fired. The head of NPR is this, had this terrible, record of woke, orthodoxy. She's still in power. But there's been some, the Harvard president stepped down. There's been a bunch of universities have recently embraced what are called the Chicago principles, which is political neutrality rather than feeling the need to take a stance for everything. So there is a sense in which it's peaked, but I think it could be a very long plateau. Obviously in politics, because Trump is, well, it's ostensibly neck and neck, but the probabilities, the betting, I think it's like they give 34% chance of Biden being reelected, and we talked before the show that he just froze in public, and it's I mean, it may be too bad because it's probably it could be that if Trump wins, it would really be on this issue of Biden's age rather than a rejection of wokeism. But yeah, I would say that the backlash is there. I mean, I talk to a lot of people who will kind of privately say to me, they'd be like, I'm an anti-woke liberal too, and. Right, so I think there's a way in which anti-woke liberals, which you would say, Matt Taibbi and me and Barry Weiss and Elon Musk even, but Matt, Bill Maher, who's on HBO, certainly Joe Rogan. These are people that support, they're fine with gay marriage and marijuana legalization and universal health care and decriminalizing. Drugs, but really hold the line at some of the really awful, stuff like the gender madness and the frankly the racialist, demonization of white people. So I think there's a kind of, I do feel like liberalism is the moral center. The comedians held the line. It was Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle and Joe Rogan, and those guys held the line.
How is it possible that they are holding the line and they are able to broadcast anything they want?
It's impressive. We were worried about Chappelle because, of course, they really tried to get him canceled. It's very strong. It's very powerful. Nobody was really worried about Joe, but Chappelle held the line. Ricky Gervais held the line. I think obviously like that's a medium that is more protected from it because you can always have this out of saying I was just joking or. But it was, I don't want to take any credit away from them because I do think that they did show some courage where other institutions, including the news media, really failed.
How is it possible? You've talk about Joe Biden, and we talk about it before the recordings. Is there any serious debate in the legacy media? What Elon Musk is saying, legacy media. Is there any debate? Because it doesn't look to me like there's something.
No, well, so you may remember that CNN for 5 minutes had this new CEO. I'll say 5 minutes, like maybe a year, but they had a CEO who tried to go back to CNN like it was in the 90s, which was balanced. And they did the town hall meeting with Trump, where Caitlin Collins, stood up on stage and argued with Trump, and it was absolutely disastrous for CNN. It was Trump performed very well in that town hall meeting, and the left and the progressive establishment was outraged that CNN platformed Trump. It led to a big Atlantic article attacking him, and basically was taken down. And I think that you still hear some people talking about the need for balance, but for the most part, I think that the mainstream news media are captured by a woke, liberal, professional managerial class audience, and they have written off so you see this bifurcation where in many ways X is now becoming a publisher, like the New York Times. Like if you go to the New York Times, I noticed that on the app on your iPhone now, it gives you little notifications in the lower right-hand corner, which of course somehow we're wired to notice these little notifications. So the New York Times looks a lot more like a platform. X looks a lot more like a publication. So you've actually got this competition now between X, X dominantly, arguably TikTok. I mean, you saw the right-wing parties, particularly this young French guy, this 28-year-old French guy from Le Pen, he's really handsome, Bardella. Yeah. He's using TikTok. So you sort of TikTok and X being places for, unorthodox, anti-woke voices, but then the mainstream media sort of doubling down and giving their audience what they want to hear.
But is this, are we talking about the death of the mainstream media? Because if I saw the Chamath from the All In podcast just published a deep dive on the new economy, and it was this amazing graph comparing numbers of Tucker Carlson at his prime, the most watched show on Fox, and then his first X content, which is like orders of magnitude higher. And you see the brain drain, where I think even Don Lemon left the CNN, and all these faces coming away, and new media, or I wouldn't say media, like publishing or creators enterprises emerging. So is this a revolution?
Isn't it? Yes, it is. Of course, it's so exciting. That's why we get to be here together. Yeah. I mean, it's thrilling, right? I mean, it's for me, as somebody that always bristled against having a boss and having, I disagreed with my editors, to be able to, publish and make a living, it's so exciting. You can see why the establishment is so threatened by it and just absolutely triggered. But yeah, there's no question. I mean, we didn't have exact numbers until recently, but you may know that the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, fired the CEO, put in place a new, head of the newspapers. These British guys, because the British newspapers, particularly under Murdoch, had succeeded, including with the renovation of the Wall Street Journal, at making the stories a little bit more lively but still substantive, and they wanted to bring that to the Washington Post. Well, he got up and there was this very, someone leaked the video, the audio from that staff room conversation, and he just said. He was getting pushback on his decisions, the new boss, and he said, look, your numbers are, our audience is down by half for the last, 3 years. So grow up, like we've got to go, and then the other piece of it was Vice, former Vice magazine editor, did a piece for Barry Weiss's Free Press, which is a publication I'm also friendly with and write for sometimes. And they said that, he said that the numbers, when Vice got woke, they would do stories like another story on black how do as we have a joke how do black trans people feel about that issue, you know what I mean? It's like, but how is climate change affecting black trans people? The numbers that they did were terrible. Like people, there's shocking. There's a limited audience. They went bankrupt. They went bankrupt. So I mean it's I actually went and, because I wanted to orient myself as to what was going on, I went and bought like the best history of the printing press. The Gutenberg movable metal type printing press. And the book argues, this is like an Oxford history, like it's like 700 pages or something. But the basic argument that she makes is that she said, we've appreciated the role of the printing press in Protestantism. Martin Luther, you crank out his little tracts on it. He said, but we've underestimated its role on everything else. She said the impact of the printing press in science, in the creation of democracies, of of free speech, medicine, enormous. And that actually historians had underestimated the impact of the printing press. I was reading that book as I was going to Brazil, with a very dramatic, experience in Brazil. And I was like, wow, X is like, it's not just the internet is like the printing press. I mean, X in particular has realized the potential of the internet in a way that I don't think other platforms had been able to.
We will get to your Brazil adventure later. But we've said many times that the break point of this debate was the acquisition of Twitter by Elon. Do you feel it the same way?
Oh, I mean, it's hard to overestimate. And I should say, I was very suspicious of Elon Musk. I wrote a book on the environment. I'm not a fan of Chinese-made solar panels, for example. I don't think you can power the world on solar panels. So I opened my chapter on renewables criticizing Elon Musk. So it made for a very awkward first meeting with Elon Musk at Twitter. I was very suspicious of him. I'm not into rockets. I drive a car that's 22 years old. Like I'm not into electric cars. But I got to say, he's, mostly kept his word in terms of free speech. When the Turkish government demanded censorship, I encouraged him to publish the censorship orders, because if you're going to follow the local laws, then at least be transparent about the censorship. He did that. There were other tests, but really it was this experience in Brazil that finally convinced me that he was going to fight as hard as he could. And look, it took the world's richest guy. It took a guy with, a huge amount of courage. I mean, he literally told the advertisers to go F themselves in December. I mean, like literally said it, and he said it twice. Yeah. And I think that's just so telling. That's what it took to finally, and he spent at least three times more on Twitter than it was worth. But that's what it took to finally release Twitter from the clutches of not just the woke, but also it turned out the intelligence and security agencies, which were exerting a lot of control and running information operations on the platform. So, no, I think it's a game changer. It was a game changer in Brazil, certainly, but I just got back from Germany where we interviewed a bunch of the right-wing politicians, many of whom I hasten to add I do not agree with on like a lot of their positions.
It's like AFD guys?
AFD guys, the most controversial group of right-wingers.
It's like 50-50. It's either,
and there's some very extreme positions. They have some very extreme positions. Like they want to deport legal migrants, right? I mean, that's very radical.
German citizenship.
I don't support that. Nonetheless, it was fascinating. They're the ones, that's where the action is, and they obviously increased their numbers in the European Parliament. But they said X has been a game changer for them. And so I think that potentially it's a game changer for politics. And we know this about new media, and not just the printing press, but we see television, radio, newspapers. Every new media technology has huge impacts on politics. And in fact, you often see media and politics, they just go together. So I think we're in the midst of a very exciting and sometimes frightening technological and media revolution.
Děkujeme, že jste doposlouchali až sem. Pokud chcete slyšet víc, celý díl najdete na adrese patreon.com/Insider Podcast. Odkaz najdete v popisku hned pod videem.
A co jsme v dnešním Insideru řešili dále? Podívejte se.
I was very suspicious of Elon Musk. But I gotta say, he's mostly kept his word in terms of free speech.
Are we talking about the death of the mainstream media?
The old media, they want to see more censorship of the new voices.
They gave Trump the presidency and they will give it to him again.
Trump has increased support from the black community. He's doubled it.
Do you think there is going to be a switch in a candidate?
You kind of go, well, Joe Biden's just a puppet. But I think if he were just a puppet, then he would have been swapped out several months ago. Yeah.
You don't challenge that there is a climate change happening.
No, I think climate change is happening. For me, the biggest environmental problem continues to be the clearing of tropical rainforest for farming.
Where is the UFO debate heading?
He's 100% sure. Contact has been made.